afternoon from the last day of the 36th Space Symposium. I'm Rich Cooper with Space Foundation, where again, we're going to give you a quick wrap up of what's been happening here on the floor of the exhibits, but also what's been happening in the press conferences and the various other presentations that have been going on today. It's been an eventful week. It's been a news-making week, both here and elsewhere. And obviously the events that are breaking in Afghanistan have obviously a lot of people of concern, but we are also hearing from a number of different parties here is how the Space Force and Space Command and all of the other assets are working to support operations over there to look after the persons that we're evacuating, but also the persons that we have in the field trying to safeguard their evacuation. So again, it's still a great day here, but obviously there's a lot of thoughts and concerns that are going on happening there. I'm joined by Brian Berger of Space News, who has been my partner in crime with this wrap up of the past couple days. We're both going to share some updates, but then we also have a special guest we're going to bring in here, Colin, who's going to fill you in on some of his thoughts. But just as a quick opener, one of the things that I heard, I heard in a number of different places this morning, and I thought it was unusual because whenever you have a transfer of administrations, it's always what the previous person did that I didn't like. Now, obviously, there was a very acrimonious campaign between President Trump and now President Biden. But one thing I have heard resoundingly was we really, really liked what the Space Council under Scott Pace, what they did, and that they want to see a continuation and this administration under the chairmanship of Vice President Harris. I've heard from the stage and a couple other places, they want to continue to build on that progress, and that I think was one of the more unusual things I think I've heard in a transfer of administrations. People are very happy with Chirag Parikh coming on board as the new executive secretary, but again, there were some real tips of the cap to the previous administration, and that's a credit to Scott Pace and the team that he had working under Vice President Pence to make some things happen. I'm going to turn it over to you because I have an answer to the question that came to our discussion yesterday about retiring the term new space. But Brian Berger, I'm going to turn it over to you for your opening thoughts.
And we'll come back to that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you, though, that the continuity between administrations, that's something that we're seeing this time around. It's nice. It's great not to have to reset space policy every 4 years. You don't really get anywhere. So we've seen that a lot. We've seen that with the Biden administration embracing going back to the moon. It won't happen by 2024, but there's still a desire to do it. It's not being thrown out as a not invented here policy. National Space Council probably has a lot to do with that. Mm-hmm. And Scott Pace put it on a very good foundation, and I think it's in really good hands with Chirag now. So that I'm really happy to see that. So my thoughts about this show is that when I first started coming here, and it was a little while ago, it was called the National Space Symposium. The Space Foundation deliberately changed the name to just Space Symposium and made a deliberate effort to make this show more international in scope. We still see that. We don't have as large of an international presence this year for obvious reasons. We've got a global pandemic that, as much as we're done with it, it's not done with us. Right. But at the same time as we've commented here this week, we've heard some rhetoric from the stage, particularly from top brass, calling out as adversaries China and Russia. Now, the head of the Chinese Space Agency has been a keynote speaker here. The head of the Russian Space Agency has been on the Heads of Agency panel. We didn't have him this year, a lot of it to do with the pandemic. What I'd like to see going forward, I want to see them coming back. I want to see them still welcome here. We know that DoD called them out. We know that NASA Administrator Nelson invited them in. They said we want to participate, but he did not mince words when he said we're in a space race with them. So now the question is, how will they respond? We know they've been listening this week. We heard that from you with the media interest that you saw. As a journalist, not as anybody speaking on behalf of Space Foundation, I want to see senior Chinese and Russian officials back here next year when we're all here in the spring, unmasked and interacting.
I won't go as far as saying that we're all going to be unmasked in the spring. I think, unfortunately,
that's probably wise.
I think we're all going to see that masks are going to be a continuing portion of our life as we go forward on this. But to pull the China thread, as you mentioned it there, I just left the luncheon at the Women's Global Gathering, and one of the comments that was made by one of the panelists was, quote, China is the only nation capable of challenging the world order of space operations. as they were talking about the continuity of policy under the new leadership of space, the National Space Council, one of the things they were talking about were establishing the norms of what space behavior. China was the only one that they said that could truly color outside the lines there and disrupt it for everybody. But as we go to continue that conversation, why don't you bring in our guest?
Yeah, I'd like to bring in my esteemed colleague, Colin Clark. He's the founding editor of Breaking Defense. I know him best as the founding editor of the Washington Aerospace Briefing, and he's a former Space News colleague going way back. So Colin, we were talking about this a little on the way over. Instead of rehashing it, just start from where we are right now.
Well, I think the most important point for everybody to remember is that the administration, as you guys noted, has got some continuity. The Biden administration has also said very clearly that they do view China as the pacing threat, but at the same time, you've got Mr. Nelson saying unequivocally, I'm putting this out there, hoping that the Chinese might cooperate with the U.S. on civil space. I think the real question is going to be, does the National Security Council put its stamp on this and make a recommendation that we reach out? Because until that happens, no matter whether the Chinese like it as an idea or not, I don't think much is going to happen.
Well, and it was interesting because, again, we started to get some of those new players that are coming on to the administration, getting their feet underneath them, making the respective connections, or I would say re-energizing a lot of connections they already have, but they're obviously going to operate from a different sphere now. What I think is telling is because the military brass have called out Russia and China by name, it will be, and again, we haven't planned the 37th symposium other than it's going to occur. I don't know who's going to be on the agenda, but like you, I would like to hear from Chinese and Russian leadership and what their thoughts are. Space is a truly global domain, and to your point on the growth of this program from being the National Space Symposium to being just Space Symposium, again, while we have a lot of space out there, we've all got to learn how we're going to work in it or not work in it, and what those rules of engagement are, and those are things that are still being fleshed out in very, very real time.
You know, one of the indicators might be what happens with copulace and norms and behaviors. We'll have to watch that the next 6-8 months.
Make no mistake about it, China has a transparency problem.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Big transparency problem. This is not the way we want to operate in space. But in getting towards transparency, we want dialogue, we want interchange. Conferences like this can help make that happen.
Well, I think one of the things, when you look at the whole week of this conference, every space symposium has always had a significant military presence. There's been no doubt about that.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
And then NASA's always had its presence. And Administrator Nelson and the NASA team and the other persons that were here did a phenomenal job. They were great. They made fabulous impressions. But I don't think there's any doubt about it. It was Space Force and Space Command that basically declared, we are here, we are now, we are the center of gravity on where we're going to go. And when you have literally two bodies that are just over a year or so old in their operations, to seize that ground, again, is a credit to the leadership, but also, again, how all of this dynamic is unfolding. They are seizing that ground, and they're not going to look to cede it to anyone. They're looking for partners. And again, I've heard that again today on the stage. They're looking for commercial partners that will work with them, as well as those international partners. I want to bring up one other thing on the international norms. I did hear Brianna who is on the National Space Council now, National Security Council in dealing with space policy. She was talking about building on what is happening with the Artemis Accords, that the number of nations that are starting to get on board, jump on board, they want to be a part of this. For countries that haven't had huge space programs, the Artemis Accord really is almost the Miracle Grow program for them, to get them at the table, give them the credibility, and to be participating in literally a mission that is bigger than all of us in many ways.
It's a good framework. Now I wish we had with us your colleague, Teresa Hitchens, who used to work at the UN. She's missed diplomacy, but do you have any thoughts about how these kind of frameworks can actually manifest themselves into something that becomes operational?
Well, perhaps the Chinese would reach out if we approach them and say, we'd like to train with you as a beginning. I can imagine something like that, but it would require, I think, a pretty significant shift in the administration's position right now to get there.
I think that's safe.
Yeah.
I'm going to change the topic here.
Sure.
I want to bring you in a conversation we started yesterday, as we mix it up here a little bit. Yesterday we had the conversation about, is it time to retire the term new space? Well, when I was at my luncheon table, I was seated next to Bill Gattle of L3 Harris, and Lieutenant General Shaw was there, who gave great remarks at the Warfighter Luncheon and mentioned that he is I would say, the author of the unfolding space thesaurus. I almost said new space, so I caught myself. So the term that was brought up at our table to replace new space is now space.
Now.
It's just changing a vowel. And
as a writer, I object.
Well, and again,
let's hear him out. Let's hear him out.
And again, we were talking about, is new space capitalized or not?
Yeah.
We capitalize the N, capitalize the S, don't know. So in sitting there at the table, we did come up with a norm that was, it would be N-O-W capitalized, and then S would also be capitalized for now space.
Okay.
As someone who's
I
worked in
maintain
this,
my objection.
Well,
then rename it. Gotcha. No.
I don't, given that Elon Musk cannot possibly be called new space anymore.
No.
And that we're probably on the third or fourth generation of new space companies in small caps. I think at this point they're just part of the space industrial base, and they don't really need to be distinguished except by perhaps their payloads.
Yeah. Well, and you have a lot of fixed price contracting, a lot of OTAs. It's like everything is new space now, right? So that's kind of wrapping back to where I was in the first place. Anyways, we're not going to solve this one out.
We're not going to solve it today.
I'll think about now space, but it still has that same problem. He wants it lowercase. I want it capital N, capital S.
I'm happy to have the conversation, the dialogue, to see where we're going to go. But what's interesting is the people who are driving this conversation. And again, that goes to all of the respective new companies, let alone the larger established names and brands that are around, but the number of new companies that are going to define that. I will share an interesting thought that I heard from the stage about an hour or so ago. When most domains are opened, it is usually a market that opens it. It is a commercial enterprise that creates that new market. And the example that was offered from the stage was when Henry Ford developed the automobile, well, government and military followed, well, we've got to build roads. We have to build other types of things. And as, we went from a car to a truck. Well, the military and government thought, well, that's a long haul vehicle or that's a tank. The point that was made from the stage was we entered the space domain backwards. The space domain was opened by military with now industry coming in. And so the roles are now certainly being reversed, that industry is certainly going to be driving more of these things than government. We certainly see that in the space report economy numbers as to the commercial enterprises that are going on there. But when I heard that we entered the space domain backwards, I thought it was an interesting point, particularly as it was a person in uniform who made that description. I'd be curious as to your thought as to, do you really think the commercial industry can continue to drive, and I would say drive government behavior in any of this anymore?
Oh yeah, at the Pentagon, it's assumed that the commercial industry now is driving most of the technological shifts that the Pentagon's dealing with. All domain operations, JADC2, all of those efforts to tie in networks globally and make new systems of command and control. But the more I think about it, the more I go back to actually Vasco da Gama. I mean, he was a state-sponsored explorer who sparked a revolution in shipbuilding because of all the money he brought back.
Yeah.
And I think as we're looking, again, that's what certainly the companies around us are looking to do. It will be interesting to see where those other financial resources come about, which is why I think we both are in agreement. We want to see at the next symposium how SPACs and the continued growth, what's going to happen with that.
Yeah.
We're going to find out one way or the other here soon enough. So, Colin, I'd like to get your thoughts on symposium this week. What worked, what didn't, what could be better, and your thoughts on the week, how it went.
It's, as always, exhausting, especially for reporters because we're going usually from about 7 in the morning till midnight each day. And we don't have the luxury of waiting until after the show to write about what we think. In terms of access, the military was actually pretty good this show. Last time, I think the access was not as easy or as swift. I don't really pay much attention anymore to the civil or commercial side, so I'll leave that to my esteemed colleague.
Yeah.
So what did we get right? What were your impressions of the week?
I would like to see you guys keep the virtual component going forward.
Okay.
Even though I didn't participate in that, I think it's really consonant with what we're talking about here in terms of openness, dialogue, exchange, transparency. Just to kind of echo off what you said with commercial now leading the way, even though it started the other way. A lot of what the commercial sector is doing is inherently dual use, especially when we start talking about servicing satellites and cleaning up space debris. There's a lot of room for misunderstanding once people start maneuvering in space and touching other people's stuff. Right? So that's why we need transparency. Virtual helps all conferences. Even though it's great to see people, there's nothing like a face-to-face connection. Virtual kind of broadens the aperture. It lets more people participate in the dialogue, and I think ultimately that's what's necessary. I think we're closer to being a multi-planet species than we've ever been in the 20 plus years that I've been covering space. It always seemed 20 or 30 years in the future. It doesn't seem that far in the future now.
So is it now space then?
I'm starting to like it.
You may have just come on board.
Hey,
I didn't realize that, but you moved right into that. That couldn't have been planned or scripted, and wasn't.
Yeah.
So, to your point about all the things that are playing, again, it was mentioned, I've heard from the stage, or it's been an echoed refrain that we have more commercial companies, more countries, and more money in space than ever before.
Right.
And literally, it doesn't seem, we all know that there are ends, but no one can see an end right now because of not only the leadership that people want to have, but I think the realization we have to have this going forward. No one can afford to ignore it or to be sitting on the sidelines. To your point on the virtual piece, this is something that we at Space Foundation are really excited about because, again, we've always wanted to expand the aperture of the symposium conversation. We've been able to do that in sharing not only our conversation, but the other activities that we've had going on here. You will see a virtual component for the 37th Space Symposium, which April 4 through 7, 2022, only 220 some odd days away. So we are no sooner going to finish up this program than in mid-October we will be opening up registration to get people back here. Obviously we hope it'll be easier for people to travel. We want people to, as much as they possibly, as they're comfortable, again, I anticipate it will probably be, again, wearing masks again. Hopefully things will continue to get better and we'll be able to beat COVID and do more and more face-to-face interactions. But I want to thank you, Brian, for co-hosting. Colin, I want to thank you for joining here today. And I want to thank you, the virtual audience, for participating with us as well. Your feedback is important to us. And so I invite you, our virtual audience, to tell us what we can be doing better in connecting you to what's happening here at Symposium. You can send that to media, MEDIA, at Space Foundation. .org, media at spacefoundation.org. I'll be hitting the reporters up with their own survey and they'll tell me what I can do better. I'm sure it has a lot to do with making sure that there's more coffee in the media working room, probably some other lunch items and those types of things. You know, again, we're at a 1.0 in a new era here, but we're learning, we're growing, we're improving, and that's one of the things we always want to do here with Space Symposium because it's important that we hear from you so that we shape a program that reflects the entire community so that we can inform, educate, and collaborate. And with that, I will say thank you very much for joining us at Catch Space. You will see us at the 37th Space Symposium. And until then, please stay healthy, please stay safe, and join us at spacefoundation.org for more activities on what's happening in the global space ecosystem. Thank you.
Amen.